December 1944. The Ardennes Forest, Belgium. Temperature -20 degrees Celsius. Thousands of American soldiers are fighting in the Battle of the Bulge, one of the bloodiest battles of World War II. But the enemy isn't just the Germans. There's another killer on that frozen battlefield, and it's invisible. For every 10 soldiers wounded in combat, 4 would die. Not from their wound, not from infection, but from something far more mundane, far more preventable. They die because the military couldn't get blood into their veins. You might think I am talking about supply shortages or lack of medical personnel. No, I am talking about glass bottles. Standard issue glass bottles that held blood for transfusions. In the sub-zero temperatures of the Ardennes winter, these glass bottles would freeze solid. The blood inside would turn into useless blocks of ice. Medics would stand there, holding a bottle of frozen blood, watching a soldier bleed out on a stretcher just feet away. The life-saving fluid was right there, but completely inaccessible. Imagine being that medic. You've trained for months. You know exactly what to do. You have the blood right in your hands, but you can't use it. You watch young men, 19, 20, 21 years old, die from wounds that should have been survivable. They don't die from enemy bullets. They die from logistics. They die from glass. And it wasn't just a few cases. It was systematic. It was happening across the entire front line. Hundreds of soldiers every week. The military knew about it. The doctors knew about it. But nobody had a solution. This isn't a story about a battle. This is a story about a nurse who changed medicine forever, but whose name almost nobody knows. Clara Daniels was 28 years old. A field nurse stationed with the Allied Medical Corps near the front lines. Every night she would count, not supplies, not equipment. She would count the men who died that day, not the ones who took direct hits from artillery, not the ones with catastrophic injuries. No, she counted the ones who should have lived, the ones with survivable wounds, the ones who bled out while frozen bottles sat useless beside them. In her diary, which survived the war and is now kept in a small archive in Pennsylvania, there's an entry from January 3rd, 1945. She writes, "There was a boy today, Private Johnston, 19 years old, shrapnel to the leg. The wound itself wasn't fatal. We could have saved him easily. We had 6 bottles of blood. All 6 were frozen solid. I held his hand. He asked me if he was going to be okay. I lied. I told him yes. He died at 3 in the morning. I sat with his body until dawn. I counted the bottles around us, 12 bottles. Enough blood to save 6 men. All frozen, all useless. The next page is water-stained. Whether from snow or tears, we don't know. But something happened to Clara that night. She didn't sleep. She sat in the medical tent staring at those glass bottles, and she thought there has to be another way. Most people would have stopped there. It was a thought, a wish. But Clara was different. She wasn't just angry at the system. She was angry enough to do something about it. A week later, Clara was washing surgical equipment. It was routine work, boring work, the kind of work where your mind wanders. She picked up a rubber surgical glove, standard issue, nothing special about it. But as she held it, something clicked in her mind. Rubber, flexible, doesn't break, doesn't freeze the same way glass does. What if blood didn't have to be stored in glass bottles? What if it could be stored in something flexible, something that wouldn't shatter when dropped, something that could conform to the chaos of a battlefield? Now this might sound simple to us today. We see plastic bags and flexible containers everywhere. But in 1944, this was revolutionary. Blood had always been stored in glass. It was medical standard. It was how things were done. Nobody questioned it. But Clara questioned it. She started experimenting. Late at night after her shifts, when the other nurses were sleeping or trying to forget the day's horrors, Clara would sit in the supply tent. She would take discarded rubber gloves, tubing from old Roman faucets, medical tape, anything she could find. Her first attempt leaked everywhere. The rubber wasn't sealed properly. Second attempt, the tape gave out under pressure. The third, fourth, fifth attempts all failed in different ways. Most people would have given up, but every morning Clara would walk through the ward and see more men who could have been saved. That's powerful motivation. By late January, she had something that worked. A crude, improvised, flexible container that could hold blood without freezing solid, that wouldn't shatter if dropped, that could be squeezed to help blood flow. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't standardized. But it worked. January 28th, 1945. Clara had her prototype ready, but there was a problem. Nobody would let her use it. It's not approved, the senior medical officer said. It hasn't been tested. We can't just use experimental equipment on wounded soldiers. Clara understood the concern. She really did. Medical protocols exist for a reason. But she also knew that the current system was killing men every single day. So she did what any scientist would do. She tested it on herself first. Using her own blood, she filled her improvised rubber container, stored it overnight in the freezing conditions outside the tent, and then, the next morning, transfused it back into herself. She documented everything: the integrity of the seal, the flow rate, the condition of the blood, her own vital signs afterward. It worked. But the self-test wasn't enough to change military protocol. Then came Private First Class Robert Miller, 22 years old, 101st Airborne Division. Shrapnel from an artillery blast. Massive blood loss. Critical condition. The doctors tried everything, but all the glass bottles were frozen. Miller was going into shock. His blood pressure was dropping. His pulse was weakening. In the corner, a doctor said quietly, "There's nothing more we can do." Clara looked at Miller. He looked back at her, eyes filled with fear. He was the same age as her younger brother. "I have something that might work," Clara said. The senior doctor turned. "Nurse Daniels, we've discussed this. Your device isn't approved. If we do nothing, he dies right here, right now. Let me try." There was a long silence. Finally, the doctor nodded. Not because he believed in Clara's invention, but because the alternative was certain death. Clara moved quickly. She filled her flexible blood container, connected the tubing, found a vein, started the transfusion. The room went quiet. Every medical professional in that tent was watching. Some were skeptical. Some were hopeful. All were tense. The blood flowed. Unlike the frozen glass bottles, Clara's flexible bag conformed to temperature changes. The blood wasn't frozen. It moved through the tube into Miller's vein. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Color started returning to Miller's lips. His pulse strengthened. His blood pressure stabilized. 30 minutes later, Private Miller opened his eyes. "What happened?" he asked weakly. A nurse whispered, "My God, it worked." Miller survived. He was evacuated to a rear hospital, recovered, and eventually went home to Pennsylvania after the war. He lived until 1998, dying of natural causes at age 75. He never knew that he was the first person saved by what would become one of the most important medical innovations of the 20th century. Word spread fast. Nurses in other field hospitals heard about Clara's flexible blood container. They started asking her for instructions, for prototypes, for anything she could share. Within 2 weeks, several forward medical units were using improvised flexible blood bags. They started calling them Daniels bags. The statistics began to change. Units using the flexible bags saw a 40% reduction in deaths from hypovolemic shock. That's not a small number. That's hundreds of lives per month. But the military bureaucracy moved slowly, very slowly. In March 1945, Clara was called before a military medical review board. A room full of senior officers, most of them men, most of them skeptical of a field nurse claiming to have revolutionized blood storage. "Miss Daniels," a colonel began, "we understand you've been using unauthorized medical equipment." "I have been saving lives, sir." "That's not the point. There are protocols, safety standards, approval processes. You can't just invent new medical procedures in the field." Clara took a breath. She had prepared for this. With respect, sir, your protocols are killing soldiers. I have data from 6 field hospitals. The mortality rate from blood loss has dropped 40% wherever my flexible bags are used. That's 237 men who are alive today who would otherwise be dead. Men like Private Miller, Private Johnson, Corporal Rodriguez. I can give you their names. But what about safety? Another officer interjected. What if the rubber degrades? What if it causes contamination? What if there are complications we don't know about? Then test it properly, Clara said. Set up a controlled trial, do the studies, but while you're doing that, please don't stop the field hospitals from using it, because every week you delay, more men die unnecessarily. The room was silent. A general in the back spoke up. What if we formalize this, get proper manufacturing, sterilization protocols, make it official? That was the turning point. It took another 4 months. The military machine doesn't move fast, even in wartime. But in July 1945, just weeks before Japan surrendered the U.S., military officially adopted flexible blood storage containers as standard issue. Here's something interesting that most people don't know. The Germans noticed before the Americans officially adopted it. In March 1945, German military intelligence filed a report. It was discovered in captured documents after the war. The report, written by Captain Hermann Voss, reads, Enemy forces have developed a new medical apparatus, flexible blood container, allows for transfusions directly at point of injury, even in freezing conditions. American casualties showing abnormally high survival rates for traumatic injuries. This represents a significant tactical advantage. Our own glass bottle system cannot compete in winter warfare conditions. Recommend immediate research into similar technology. Think about that. The German military, in the middle of losing the war, took time to write a report about a medical device. Why? Because they understood that keeping soldiers alive and returning them to combat is a force multiplier. Clara's innovation wasn't just saving lives. It was changing the strategic balance of the war. But here's the irony, the Germans knew something had changed, but they never knew it was invented by a single field nurse. They assumed it was a high-level military research project. They never imagined it came from a 28-year-old woman with a rubber glove and a desperate need to stop watching young men die. The war ended. August 1945. Soldiers came home. There were parades, medals, celebrations. Stories of heroic generals, brave pilots, fearless infantry soldiers. Clara Daniels came home quietly to a small town in Pennsylvania. No parade, no medal, no recognition. The flexible blood bag, meanwhile, became standard medical equipment. Pharmaceutical companies started mass production. By 1950, it was in every hospital in America. By 1960, worldwide. But when medical journals wrote about it, they referred to it as developed by the U.S. Army Medical Corps in 1945. No mention of Clara. No attribution to a field nurse. For decades, Clara never talked about it. She went back to nursing at a local hospital. She married a teacher. She had 2 children. She lived a quiet, normal life. Her daughter, in an interview many years later, said, Mom never made a big deal about it. Once, I found her old army nurse uniform in the attic. I asked her about the war. She said, I did what needed to be done, that's all. That was it. She never elaborated. But in 1973, something unexpected happened. A letter arrived from Germany. The sender was Hermann Voss, now in his 70s, the same captain who had written that intelligence report in 1945. Voss had spent 28 years researching the origins of the flexible blood bag. He wanted to know who invented it. He tracked down records, interviewed veterans, followed paper trails. Eventually, he found Clara. His letter read, Dear Mrs. Daniels, I write to you as a former enemy but a fellow witness to the horror of war. I was the German medical intelligence officer who first reported on your invention in 1945. For nearly 3 decades, I have sought to learn the name of the person who created the flexible blood storage container. Today, I learned it was you. As someone who fought against you, I must say your invention saved more lives than any weapon destroyed. You deserve recognition. The world should know your name. With profound respect, Herman Voss. Clara read the letter. She folded it carefully. She put it in a drawer. She never published it. She never used it to claim recognition. Her daughter asked why. Clara said, "It's not about credit, it's about the lives saved. That's enough." Today, right now, as you listen to this, somewhere in the world, someone is being saved by a blood bag. Every year, 118 million blood donations are collected globally. Nearly all of them are stored in flexible plastic bags, direct descendants of Clara Daniels' innovation. Every car accident victim, every surgical patient, every cancer patient needing transfusions, every trauma case in every emergency room, they all benefit from Clara's refusal to accept that glass bottles were the only option. The numbers are staggering. Conservative estimates suggest that flexible blood bags have directly contributed to saving over 500 million lives since 1945. 500 million people who lived because a nurse improvised a solution in a freezing Belgian forest. Walk into any medical museum. You will see blood bags on display. There will be a placard explaining the history of transfusion medicine. It will mention the discovery of blood types, the development of anticoagulants, the establishment of blood banks. It will show a picture of a flexible blood bag with text that reads, "Introduced in 1945. Clara Daniels' name will not be there. But every time a paramedic grabs a blood bag for a crash victim, Clara is there. Every time a surgeon calls for more blood in an operating room, Clara is there. Every time a child with leukemia receives a transfusion, Clara is there. Her legacy isn't in monuments or awards. It's in the quiet accumulation of lives saved. It's in the people who don't even know they owe their existence to a field nurse who refused to accept unnecessary death." So why am I telling you this story? Why does it matter at most people don't know Clara Daniels' name? Because it teaches us something vital about innovation, about change, about making a difference in the world. The biggest changes often come from the most unexpected places. Not from the people with the most credentials, not from the ones with the most authority, but from someone standing right in the middle of a problem, someone who refuses to accept that this is how it's always been done. Clara Daniels wasn't a doctor. She wasn't a medical researcher. She wasn't a general or a policy maker. She was a nurse with a rubber glove and an idea. But she had three things that mattered more than credentials. First, she saw the problem clearly. She didn't abstract it. She didn't theorize about it. She counted the bodies. She held the hands of dying men. She felt the weight of preventable death. Second, she believed a solution was possible. Most people saw the frozen glass bottles and thought, that's just how wars, that's just what happens. Clara thought, this doesn't have to be this way. Third, and most importantly, she acted. She didn't wait for permission. She didn't wait for someone more qualified. She improvised. She tested. She failed. She tried again. And when she finally had something that worked, she fought for it against institutional resistance. That's the real lesson here. The world doesn't change because smart people have ideas. The world changes because determined people act on ideas, even when the odds are against them, even when nobody believes in them, even when they'll never get credit for it. Clara Daniels saved millions of lives. Most of those people don't know her name. She never got a Nobel Prize. She never made money from her invention. She never became famous. But she changed the world anyway. There's a question I want to leave you with. Right now, somewhere in your life, there's a problem. Something that everyone accepts as just the way things are. Something that frustrates you, that seems wasteful or unnecessary or preventable. Maybe it's in your workplace. Maybe it's in your community. Maybe it's in your family or your school or your industry. Everyone around you has accepted it. They've made peace with it. They say that's just how it is. But you don't have to accept it. Clara Daniels stood in a freezing medical tent in Belgium and held a rubber glove and thought, there's another way. What's your rubber glove? What's a simple thing right in front of you that could change everything if you just looked at it differently? And more importantly, what are you going to do about it? Because here's the truth. The world doesn't need more people who are smart enough to see problems. It needs more people who are brave enough to solve them. It needs more people like Clara Daniels who care more about saving lives than getting credit, who act when others hesitate, who refuse to let bureaucracy or tradition or fear stop them from doing what needs to be done. This is the story of the woman who saved millions. A woman whose name you probably never heard before today. A woman who didn't do it for recognition or glory or fame. She did it because it needed to be done, and she was the one standing there with the ability to do it. So remember Clara Daniels. Remember her name. Share her story. But more importantly, remember what she taught us. One person, one idea, one action. It can change everything. The question is, will that person be you? The end.